What is up, everybody? This is Jacob Westendorf. I am filling in for Andy Herman. Andy, unfortunately, a little under the weather, which means you will have to try and resist the urge to be under the weather by looking at my face instead of his for the next little bit. Welcome to the show, everybody. I hope everybody had a Merry Christmas, a happy holiday, whatever it is that you celebrate this time of year with your friends, family, loved ones, whoever it is that you care about the most. I hope that you found that, and I hope you enjoyed the early Christmas present that the Packers gave us all, a dominant 34-0 win over the New Orleans Saints. Not unexpected, but there weren't any other shutouts in the NFL this season, so I don't think you can just kind of hand wave and poo-poo that for lack of better phrasing. It's impressive. Shutting a team out, it's impressive no matter what way you slice it. I don't care who's playing on the other side. Those are paid professional athletes. And even something fluky didn't happen, like a cornerback fell down and made things easy for an easy touchdown or something like that. And the Saints didn't even get a chance to kick a field goal. So I thought Green Bay's defense played very sound based on the watch and the rewatch. And the offense is kind of a well-oiled machine, even if they do still leave a few things on the field every now and again. But not going to be able to do that this week. A clash of the Titans, if you will, between the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. I want to start today's show. Andy told me that I needed to make fun of the Bears for 10 minutes. And I told him back that I did not want to punch down because when a team loses 10 in a row, I mean, the results kind of speak for themselves. It's the same story every year. Chicago tells us, their fan base tells us how everything's changed. It's all different now. They've got this, they've got that, they've got this guy coming in. They got this guy going out. Green Bay's got this happening. It's over. It's done with, whatever. And by the end of the season, Green Bay's probably beaten Chicago twice. Chicago probably has disappointed. And their generational quarterback, whether it's Justin Fields or Mitchell Trubisky before him, or now Caleb Williams, disappointment. Just some quick thoughts on Chicago since you asked and you really didn't, but I'll throw them in here. We'll see what they do on the head coaching side of things. I will be shocked if it's Ben Johnson. Well, shocked, maybe not the right word, but I will be a little surprised if it's Ben Johnson. I just can't anticipate a notoriously frugal ownership trying to spend that type of money for a coach while they're still paying another coach currently with Matt Eberflus. The other thing will be that I don't think it necessarily has to be an offensive guy. You look at the Bears, DJ Moore's talking about going on vacation. Keenan Allen is talking about how he plays for the name on the back of his jersey. That's a team that needs a culture reset, and in a big, big way. That's not to say that they need to just, hire a culture guy for the sake of doing that. But like the hand waving of Mike Vrabel, for example, and again, same sort of issue with Vrabel that you might have with Ben Johnson, but not something I think should be out of the question. I think the idea that Chicago just needs to get an offensive guy because that's what'll work best. Maybe, yes, it all matters. Like getting Caleb Williams to be the guy that he's supposed to be certainly matters. But Matt Nagy was an offensive coach that was hired to get the most out of Mitchell Trubisky. Kind of did. And then also, the culture by the end of his tenure in Chicago wasn't good enough. Same deal. And that's kind of one of the things that we're kind of spoiled with here in Green Bay, quite frankly. The culture here is phenomenal. And if you don't believe me, listen to Xavier McKinney, listen to Josh Jacobs, listen to some of the guys, Keyshawn Nixon, guys that have been elsewhere where the culture isn't good, and coming over to Green Bay and finding out what it's like to play for a winning organization. So those are my thoughts on the Bears, on Green Bay's culture and everything like that. I want to transition before I get into the Vikings stuff here with some thoughts on Jaire Alexander. And I am basing this, and I know this, on a small percentage probably, but just talking with people on and just kind of reading through my Twitter timeline, for everybody that's saying that the beat writers aren't pushing LaFleur to give better answers than what they have, like they ask almost every other day as to what's going on. Matt Schneidman, I know, asked LaFleur on the podcast that they have together. If LaFleur's just going to say it's a knee injury, then that's all he's going to say. Like, coaches and everybody are just – this is how they deal with injuries in the NFL for one reason or another. And I will be right there with you to say I do not understand it, why they treat injuries like they're Fort Knox, like the player's either going to play or he's not. And I can understand like the thought process leading up to it, but saying, hey, Jaire's not going to play this week and here's why. Like if it was as simple as saying he had a setback, then say that. I don't know what it is. What I do know, and this happened with David Bakhtiari, it happened with Clay Matthews, it happened with Jaire Alexander last year, it's happening with Jaire Alexander now. I can promise you guys, based on the people I've talked to, the people that just what I know about the National Football League as a whole, there's nothing more disrespectful than for you to say that someone with no basis for it, by the way, that someone who is healthy enough to play is actively choosing not to play. Number one, if that were happening, then that player would be suspended for conduct detrimental to the team, placed on injured reserve, something to the point where he's not coming back, right? Number two, these are guys who, for lack of better phrasing, kill themselves for our entertainment. Like I remember doing the show a few years ago on Game On Wisconsin with Jamal Williams, and Jamal telling us about how like after a game had ended, they would go have a quote unquote flush workout. Like, so after playing 4 quarters of football, he would be in the gym working out to get a flush. Like, and granted, that's not an extensive, but it's incredible to me. I mean, I remember my days playing much, much lower level football, barely being able to move after a game was over. These guys have to do that. Then you add in the hours of, and this is just physical stuff, rehab and training and everything that they do just to be on the field on Sundays. That doesn't include the hours of mental exhaustion of film study and meetings and everything else that goes into it. I understand it's frustrating that Alexander's hurt. I understand that it's frustrating that he's missed as much time as he has. I understand that it's frustrating that he tried to come back against Chicago. Clearly, that was something that happened too soon. And then he re-injured himself and has now missed more time as a result of that. I understand all of those things. I do not understand this vitriol toward the player for being unable to play because of an injury. And the other thing that I will say about it is when somebody's like, oh, well, then, like just cut him, like whatever, cut bait and move on. That's not like a magic wand that magically says poof and fixes the problem. Because everybody I know doesn't think Green Bay's cornerback room is up to snuff. Well, it doesn't get better by letting Jaire Alexander just go away. Maybe that's something they do in the offseason. I don't know. We're a long ways away from that. But what I will say is I have so much respect for what these players do on a week-to-week, on a day-to-day basis that I feel like it's almost my responsibility to push back when someone says the player could play, he's choosing not to, or he's punking out, or whatever worse things are that are said about a player on the internet. Now, I do have friends who have said, with him specifically, there's a sour taste in their mouth. And I can understand it. I personally don't feel that way, but I understand it when, a year ago, Alexander inserted himself as a captain, put himself above the team, eventually got suspended. Like, I can understand worrying about that or having an issue with that. But again, to suggest a player could play and is choosing not to, this isn't the NBA. Like, where load management is king. And they've admitted that, so I'm not being even disrespectful when I say that. All that to say, yes, it sucks that Alexander is not going to play. Yes, it sucks that he's injured, and frankly, I don't know if he'll be back this season. I really don't. He's not going to play this week against Minnesota. He was ruled out today. I would be shocked if he played next week against Chicago, and then we're into the postseason. So we'll see what that is. Certainly a little weird that he's practiced but been unable to play. But it's clear they wanted him at least at full strength. And Matt LaFleur has said in the pit, like he said, he wasn't hitting speeds one particular week. Maybe that's a little odd. Maybe it's not. But again, there's nobody that would know. So reporters, people with sources, stuff like that, nobody has suggested Alexander is choosing not to play. So by saying as such on the internet, you're doing so, one, recklessly, and two, more importantly, unfairly. I can feel pretty good about saying that Alexander wants to be on the field. But that is my TED Talk for the day. I'll get off the soapbox and I'll move into a pretty big game this weekend. It's Green Bay and Minnesota. A win, they have a chance to lock themselves essentially into the 6th seed. With a loss by Washington, they have a chance to play for the 5th seed next week if they were to win. And if Minnesota were to lose to Detroit, Green Bay would be the 5 seed based on virtue of various tiebreakers. Not unimportant for people to just kind of hand wave the idea of seeding. I don't agree. Because if you're the 7 seed and in the first round you have to go to Philadelphia, that's a tough task. If you win that game in Philadelphia, now you have to go to Detroit or Minnesota. Not exactly a desirable location to play a road playoff game, especially after playing a tough physical game like the one you'd have to against Philadelphia in the first round. And then potentially the 3 seed or whatever, NFC Championship game is there's no chance of an outside shot at a home game. And you're probably going to have to play the 1, 2, and 3 seeds to get Super Bowl. Now they've done it. Everybody will point out 2010 to me where they won. They were the 6 seed. They beat Philly as the 3. Then they beat Atlanta, and then they beat the 2 seed Chicago and wrote to the Super Bowl where they beat the Steelers. Yes, it can be done. But one, I do think it's important to potentially get yourself a chance to play someone, whoever wins the NFC West. We just saw them beat the piss out of Seattle 2 weeks ago. And I if it were Seattle to win the NFC North or the NFC West, then I do think that that's something that would be an advantageous matchup for Green Bay. I think the Rams, not my favorite matchup of the groups that they could play in the wildcard round, but a better matchup than Philly or one of the other NFC North teams. And then, of course, if you're the 5 seed, you play the winner of the NFC South, which is Atlanta, who would be starting a rookie quarterback who are historically awful in postseason debuts, or Tampa Bay, who solid team, but they're pretty average. Now, they have beaten some really good teams this year. They beat Philly earlier in the year. They did beat Detroit before Detroit went on that ridiculous winning streak that they had. From a seeding perspective, though, this game matters. The other reason I think this game matters, Green Bay has a lot of they almost beat this team. They almost beat that team. In the grand scheme of things, will it matter in the playoffs if they don't win this game? Maybe not, but I don't think that it's nothing to say that the team could have a small semblance of doubt. Can we actually beat a team like Minnesota, Detroit, or Philadelphia? That'll be 4 of their 5 losses, or all 5 of their losses would be to those teams if they lost to Minnesota on Sunday. I don't think that's nothing. So with that in mind, looking at some of the guys, here are my most important players going into Sunday's game against Minnesota. And my first 2, I'm going to start, you guys know me at this point. I'm starting with the offensive tackles. Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker, they're playing on the road in a hostile environment that's very loud against a vicious pass rush. Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Greenard, they both have double-digit sacks. Minnesota with Brian Flores, as good as anybody at scheming up pressures, making you guess who's coming and who's not. Just kind of some communication has to happen at the line of scrimmage. But there's going to come points where those two are asked to play on an island and block those 2 guys. Greenard might be an all-pro by the end of the year. Van Ginkel will certainly get some information and some votes for the Pro Bowl, if not more. So putting those guys together, I think, and keeping them in check. Jordan Love has done a really good job of avoiding sacks, but you got to be able to have some time in that pocket to push the ball down the field. There are some opportunities down the field against Minnesota. We'll see if Christian Watson can play. He was listed as questionable. Hopefully he can go. Being able to have your most explosive weapon in the passing game is probably a big deal in a game like this one. But if not, then obviously they still have 3 other guys that they like quite a bit. That's not including Tucker Kraft, Jacobs in the passing game, etc. Luke Musgrave returned last week. Like, they have guys, but your degree of difficulty certainly rises with Watson on the bench. So that leads me kind of into my second point, which is Jaden Reed, who has been awesome against Minnesota. He was really good last year at US Bank Stadium on New Year's Eve. 2 touchdowns, had the big one right before halftime. He had one this year, obviously, right before halftime as well. And he's the guy who, if it's not Watson making explosive plays, then it's Reed. And again, against a team like Minnesota, you're probably not being patient, dinking and dunking them down the field a bunch. You've got to make plays, explosives down the field. And Reed is the guy, if Watson can't go, I think that can certainly do that. They have some other candidates, obviously. Tucker Kraft making plays after the ball is in his hands. But Reed is the guy who has the speed and the chance to turn, a 7-yard gain into a 67-yard gain. We've seen him do that this year. After that, it's the cornerback room. I don't think there's any question. There's a big circle on this for probably Minnesota, frankly, too. Stokes and Valentine both have played better of late. Keyshawn Nixon's had a good season. But this is a different animal. Justin Jefferson is as good as it gets, probably the best receiver in the NFL these days. And Jordan Addison's a very, very capable number 2 receiver across from him. So those guys are going to get their opportunities. It's a matter of limiting them as much as possible. Both guys, you can't have what you had last time around. Addison scored, Jefferson scored, and Minnesota just kind of went up and down the field on Green Bay's defense, especially in the first half. And that's where starting fast in this game is paramount. Green Bay's trend in their games that they've lost this year, they started slower against Philadelphia. They were gifted 6 points on 2 turnovers that set them up deep in Philadelphia territory. Only getting 6 points out of that ended up costing them later in the game. The game they lost. Detroit, they fell down 24-3. They were pretty poor in the first half as well against Detroit the second time they played them. And then Minnesota, it was 28-0. So for everyone that was like, oh, it was a 2-point game at Lambeau last time, like, yes, but it was 28-0 before the game ever got something that resembled close. So I'm not saying that Green Bay can't beat Minnesota. I'm just saying it using that first game as evidence is not the greatest point there. So starting fast certainly comes in there as well. And I think Reed could be part of that as well as the corners. If you can get an early stop, if you end up not getting the ball first, going down the field is certainly one way to shut the opposing crowd up. The Packers did that 2 weeks ago against the Seahawks, excuse me. That would help on Sunday in Minnesota. I will not be surprised if Matt LaFleur continues his trend of receiving the kick after if they win the coin toss. And obviously pretty much every other team defers. So Green Bay doesn't win the coin toss, then Minnesota will probably defer and give Green Bay the ball, which is a chance. I mean, that's a loud stadium, guys. It gets loud in there. You guys know the deal. They pump in crowd noise, all that funny stuff too. But that's a tough place to play. Matt LaFleur's talked about that a lot this week. The other group that I want to say, the interior guys, Devontae Wyatt, Kenny Clark, Carl Brooks, anybody that they line up inside over these guards and the center, pushing the pocket. Sam Darnold, for as good of a season he has, and he's in the bottom third of the league in turnover-worthy plays. So the easiest way to make him kind of make some mistakes is to push the pocket. And if you push the pocket and get some pressure in his face, he can put the ball in harm's way. He did do that against Green Bay the first time they played. Isaiah McDuffie just didn't catch the interception that was thrown to him. And you got to catch the ones he throws to you because he will throw them to you. But you got to make those plays because for every couple plays he makes like that, he's going to make a couple plays to his band of receivers and tight end TJ Hawkinson and Aaron Jones and this explosive offense that Minnesota has led by Kevin O'Connell. But getting Wyatt, who's got a sack each of the last 2 weeks, he was good, really good against Seattle. He was good against New Orleans. Kenny Clark has looked more like Kenny Clark here in the last 3-4 weeks or so as well. Minnesota's offensive line really is Brian O'Neill at right tackle and then 4 question marks. If there is a game that Green Bay's front has to live up to its expectation, and they've done better of late, especially since the trade of Preston Smith. I don't know if those two things are related, but that is the line we'll use. This is the game that the front has to win because they are undermanned in the secondary. And honestly, they're undermanned in the secondary even if Alexander plays. Because with the way that offense is played in the NFL, it's just easier to play on offense. And Jefferson knows where he's going and Alexander doesn't. And O'Connell is very good at finding easy opportunities for his best players. Jefferson certainly is one of those. So there will be plays where, Jefferson's going to make a couple. I think this game is going to have some points back and forth, which is interesting just because of the ranking. Like these two defenses are both ranked very highly. But I think this is a game where both offenses can move the ball up and down the field. It's going to come down to big plays on the defensive side of the ball and who makes more of them. Green Bay has to be the team who does that. And one of the ways they do that, again, is pushing that pocket and getting after Sam Darnold and making him be the one who makes the mistakes. Jordan Love, only one interception since the bye. That's been talked about quite a bit. He's played very well. So that's a big spot for him. As far as it's Saturday, as you guys are watching this, so I'll give a little bit of a prediction. Not even a little bit. I guess it would be a prediction. The game's in Minnesota. I think the Vikings have more to play for because Green Bay is simply playing for seeding. I know I just said everything I said earlier, but that is a little bit different than playing for a shot to play for the division title and the number 1 seed, which is what Minnesota will have. If they beat Green Bay, they will play Detroit next week and in a winner-take-all for the NFC North and probably the 1 seed in the NFC as well. So I think Minnesota has more to play for. I think they're at home. I think this is truly a coin flip. I think these are 2 great teams. It will not shock me at all if we are doing this again in 4 weeks for the NFC Championship game. Green Bay against Minnesota in Minnesota for the title game. Won't shock me one bit. But I like Minnesota 30-27. Won't shock me if it goes the other way. I just think Minnesota's got that home field on their side and a little bit more to play for. So thank you guys for watching. You guys know what to do. Hit that like, rate, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Andy should be back tomorrow to preview Packers and Vikings, so he'll do that a little bit more in depth than what I was able to do today. You can follow me. I'm Jacob Westendorf on Twitter, X, Blue Sky, MySpace, Facebook, RuneScape. I don't think that was a social media, but whatever. Just find my name there. You can find my work, Packers on SI with Bill Huber, and athlonsports.com/Packers Central, where I write something about the Packers at least once every day. And I got quite a bit of stuff coming up here. It's almost end of season, postseason, and then it'll be right into draft season. So I got plenty of stuff going on that way. But check me out, like, rate, subscribe. Enjoy the game on Sunday. Happy holidays, everyone. Be with your families and be safe.